Chapter 9 in our study of introductory economics is all about business organizations. In this chapter, we're going to start off with taking a quick look at the business profile in the United States, and then spend most of our time looking at the structure and the characteristics of business organizations, primarily the sole proprietorship, the partnership, and the corporation. With regard to the business profile in the United States, there are two general key facts to keep in mind. The first is that most of the businesses in the United States are considered small businesses. The federal government defines a small business as a business or firm that has 500 or less employees. And the total number of businesses within the United States, including small and large businesses, generally fluctuates around a little over 6 million firms. The second point about the business profile in the United States is that the United States economy is effectively a services and technology economy now. A little bit on the history behind that. During the 1800s, the United States economy was an agricultural economy. Farms played a big role in terms of economic production in our overall economy. In the early 1900s to mid-1900s, the United States economy could be classified as an industrial economy. And in the late 1900s, we moved into this configuration of being a services and technology-based economy. Let's now start to take a look at what these 6 million plus businesses look like. And let's start with something real simple and give you a working definition of a business organization in general. It's an establishment formed to carry on a commercial enterprise. And there are 5 factors that make any business successful. Here's the first. You got to have a great idea, an idea that has demonstrable value. If you're not familiar with the word demonstrable used in this case, means capable of being shown, obvious, apparent, evidence. The importance of oil is easily demonstrable. Here's the second factor that makes a business successful. Sufficient financial backing to get it off the ground. Having enough money to invest in it, to put it into play and operation. Third, very important, having the right people with the right set of skills and knowledge. Fourth, the ability to control costs. Having the right financial backing, critically important, but also using the money and the financial backing wisely to be efficient and productive. The fifth factor that makes businesses successful is on behalf of the federal government and state government, having public policy that helps businesses reasonably manage risk and provides positive incentives. And generally, the way to do this is by having low taxes, sensible regulation, and encouraging free trade. Now let's start to take a look at specifically the types of business structures, organizations, and how they are organized and what their characteristics are. And we'll start with the most commonly found type of business organization, which is the sole proprietorship. And here's your working definition for a sole proprietorship. It's a business that is owned and managed by a single individual. In most societies, a sole proprietor is usually considered an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur is a person who risks their assets in an effort to make a profit. You may not be familiar with the word asset, so let me give you a working definition for that. An asset is any item of value to which an individual or an organization holds a legal claim to. Some examples, and there's a wide variety of things that can be included in assets: cash, tools, buildings, goods produced, Even your individual talents are considered assets. Now, because sole proprietorships make up the overwhelming majority of the businesses in our economy, it's very likely that you already know somebody that's a sole proprietor, possibly one of your parents. But let's have a little fun with this for a second, a little comedy, if you will, and propose to you, do you happen to know what the world's most famous sole proprietorship is? Well, I'd suggest that it might be this: the Krusty Krab. And if you're familiar with the Krusty Krab, you're probably familiar with its sole proprietor, Mr. Krab. And if you know Mr. Krabs, you probably know this character as well. And I use the word character. Well, enough said. Hey, let's take a look at the characteristics of a sole proprietorship. There are 4 characteristics of a sole proprietorship. Here's the first. The owner earns all the profits for the business. And if we think back to Mr. Krabs, we know what his priority is: money, money, money. Second, the owner is responsible for all the debts of the business. Third, sole proprietorships make up 75% of all the businesses in the United States. And the fourth characteristic, however, they produce only 6% of all business revenue. It's not where the big money is. Now we'll take a look at both the advantages and disadvantages of running a sole proprietorship. And we'll start with the advantages, of which there are 5. Here's the first. Sole proprietorships are pretty easy and low cost to start up and get running. But I'm going to make a couple of recommendations here with regard to that. The first thing I recommend is that if you're going to start your own business as a sole proprietor, you should invest I think it was the last time I checked, about $50 to $60 in obtaining a business license and name for your business. And you can actually do this online through most of the state websites, whichever state you're working in, and starting your business. And here's the reason why you want to do this. You're going to invest money in getting name recognition out on your business, and let's say you're successful with that and you put money into marketing and people start to recognize your business and things are going good. And somebody else decides to enter the same market with you and compete with you in a similar business. And let's say that you did not go and get a business license and an official name for your business, and this other person takes the same name and begins to use it to run the same type of business, and that person goes and actually gets the business license and name approved by the state that you're operating in. Well, guess what? That person has the rights to that business name, and you're going to have to change it if they require it. And all the money that you invested in getting your business started on marketing and brand awareness, if you will, is going to go down the drain. I've seen this happen countless times to people that start a sole proprietorship and can't emphasize enough that you need to take care of this simple matter of business licensing and officially getting your name approved. The second thing is that some businesses, even small businesses like sole proprietorships, might need a site permit. For example, if you're running some sort of manufacturing or even, for example, an auto mechanic shop, where you might be handling what the state or federal government would consider hazardous wastes, you need to get a permit that authorizes you, and obviously you would have to prove that you know how to handle hazardous waste and have that permit and official approval by the state and local governments to do that. I've seen businesses that are handling hazardous waste that have not gotten site permits, that the state and local government will actually come in and close down the business if they don't have a site permit and prove that they know how to do that. So that's another small, what might seem like a small detail, but an important detail that you need to take care of even as a sole proprietor. The next advantage is that generally or usually there are fewer regulations that are imposed on sole proprietorships. However, I have question marks here, and the reason for that is in recent years, in talking to a number of sole proprietorships, they quite often tell me that the amount of regulations is increasing. I do not know these days whether it's still to the level that corporations face, but traditionally, sole proprietorships have faced fewer regulations. Third, you get to keep all the profit running a sole proprietorship, and that's certainly an advantage. Fourth, you have, as the owner of the business, full and only owner of the business, full management control over the organization. And just as easy as sole proprietorships are to start, they're just as easy to close up the business. There are very few regulations or requirements with regard to that. You could almost be in business one day and decide to move on and do something else and close the business the next. I kind of equate it to almost like running a lemonade stand. You could go down to a corner with your lemonade pitcher and set up a sign saying, lemonade 5 cents a glass, and when you're done selling your lemonade, you can pack up your stand, remove it from the street corner, and close it down. For sole proprietorships, it's almost that easy to close up businesses. Let's now take a look at the 4 disadvantages of running a sole proprietorship. The first disadvantage is that you, as the owner of the business, you are the business, you have unlimited personal liability for any potential damage that the business would do to either some person or some other business, damage to their assets, let's say. And this is the case even if your employee does the damage. Because you are the business, it's your personal liability. The second disadvantage of a sole proprietorship is that because you are the business, the resources available to grow the business, and we'll talk primarily about financial resources, are limited. They're limited to what you may have in your bank account and be able to directly invest in the business. Also, the only other way to raise money would be to go to a bank for a loan or some financial institution for a loan. And the financial institution is going to look at you as an individual, not so much the business. And they're going to look at your credit record and your personal financial history, again, because you are the owner. So many times this winds up limiting a sole proprietor's ability, especially if they do not have a good financial record, to raise the money that they need to actually grow the business. The third disadvantage is that it's difficult for sole proprietors to recruit and retain employees. And this is for 2 reasons. First is that many sole proprietors cannot afford, in running their business, to offer the benefits that, let's say, a large corporation or a partnership can offer employees. So employment with a sole proprietor may not be as attractive as it would be with these other types of business organizations. The second is that a sole proprietor is probably going to be able to offer a limited amount of career opportunities to employees because over time, especially if a business stays small, there's limited ability for an employee to rise to the top in an organization because the sole proprietor is there and they're not going to be going anywhere. Now, if a sole proprietorship is growing and expanding and has a successful business model, there may be some supervisory opportunities, for example, like a job foreman for an employee, but still that's going to be limited over the long term in a sole proprietorship because the owner of the business is really not going to be moving on. The fourth disadvantage is the passing on of ownership winds up to be a problem sometimes for sole proprietors. I've seen many, many cases where somebody has built a strong business and has been managing it successfully for many, many years, and they have a family, but nobody in the family is interested in taking over that business when it comes time for that individual to retire. For example, children. And what that does is it places the sole proprietor in a difficult position, because their only option is to sell the business as they go to retire to try to recoup some of the investment that they had put into the business. And in selling a business where there's nobody to take it over, they're put at a disadvantage from a negotiating standpoint. Somebody that would come in to be interested in buying the business would quickly realize that why the sole proprietor is selling the business, and it puts the buyer in a stronger negotiating position than the sole proprietor. And what usually winds up happening is that the sole proprietor many times does not get the full value that they would for the business that's been being run successfully for a long period of time. Now let's move on to partnerships. And here's your working definition for a partnership. It's a business organization owned by two or more people who agree on a specific division of responsibilities and profits. There are three types of partnerships. Here's the first: a general partnership. In this case, the partners share equally in responsibility and liability for the business. Second type of partnership, it's called a limited partnership. In this case, one partner has unlimited management responsibility and personal liability, very similar to the situation with the sole proprietor. The other partners are really just investors putting in money into the business. Now, I've been using the word liability a lot here, so if you're not familiar with that, let's give you a little bit more background on it. Liability, an obligation for which somebody is responsible. Synonym, obligation, related, exposure. Used in a sentence, a poor reputation for product quality had become a liability for the company. An example that you may be familiar with of a limited partnership, quite commonly you see this in sports franchises. Arguably the most famous limited partnership in the world, some people say, is the New York Yankees baseball club. It's a limited partnership. So it's very commonly seen with sports franchises. The third type of partnership is called a limited liability partnership, an LLP. In this case, all the partners are partially liable for another partner's mistakes if they do occur. It's very typical to see law firms, medical practices in which there are multiple doctors involved, and accounting firms set up as businesses as limited liability partnerships. Let's take a look at the four advantages of establishing a partnership. Just like the sole proprietorships, partnerships are easy to start. However, some of the same warnings or advice comes into play here. For example, I would highly recommend that you go and get a business license and establish the name for your business partnership, because just like with a sole proprietorship, somebody could come in, if you don't do that, and steal the name for the business, and you'll wind up losing the investment that you've put into any marketing or name recognition. So take care of that simple, inexpensive business license. Secondly, if your partnership is a business that needs a site permit, like I had explained earlier, take care of that too, so that you don't wind up having local or state or federal authorities coming in and actually shutting you down because you don't have a site permit. Now, here's one additional thing to consider with partnerships. Highly recommend that you establish an articles of partnership, and even go to the point of maybe having an attorney, a lawyer, write this up for you, and it needs to be in writing. It's a simple agreement on the responsibilities and profits for the partnership. And yes, I emphasize this is even true to have this done even if you're going into business with a family member, a brother, a sister, or a cousin. Put the agreement on responsibilities and profits into writing so that it is understood by everybody and can be referred back to. The second advantage of establishing a partnership is bringing in additional specialized experience. After all, that's why you would want to probably establish the partnership to begin with. Let's use an example. Let's say that you had the dream to establish a general construction firm that builds homes, as an example. And your experience happens to be in the carpentry end of things, but you would like to be able to be a full service provider, and you would need somebody that would have masonry experience, somebody else electrical, somebody else plumbing, so forth, and you have people that you know that have that skill set that you could bring into the business to establish a partnership and collectively put together a full-service business. So by forming partnerships, you can bring in that specialized experience to your business. The third advantage is that with your partners coming in, they bring their resources and their assets with them. And that was a limiting factor for a sole proprietor. Here, by bringing in partners, they bring in their resources to be able to invest in the business and help it grow. And the fourth advantage, and I'm not a tax attorney or a tax accountant, but I know for a fact in the United States tax code, both at the state and federal level, there are some advantages, is my understanding, to the establishment of a partnership as a business as to a sole proprietorship. So you may want to take a look at what those advantages are as well. There are two disadvantages of partnerships. The first one is sometimes argued that it's not a disadvantage because the general partner knows this going in. But be that as it may, the unlimited liability of a general partner might work out to be a disadvantage for that general partner if the partnership is not a limited liability partnership. The second disadvantage is that because you have multiple people having a large say in how the business is run, the potential for interpersonal conflict is greater, meaning resulting in disagreements and potential breakups of the business. In fact, it's this item in particular that is the most common cause for partnership breakups. And now we'll move on to corporations. And let me give you the working definition to start with. Corporations are legal entities owned by individual stockholders. And corporations are very interesting organizations, and primarily because of the two words that we see here in the definition, legal entity. Our society looks at a corporation no different than they look at an individual person. And there are a lot of striking similarities here. When you're born as an individual in our society, you have a birth certificate that proves who you are and so forth. Well, when corporations are created, they also have birth certificates. They're called articles of incorporation. And from a tax standpoint and a legal standpoint, our legal system looks at corporations no different than an individual human being. And that raises a whole bunch of interesting questions about their operations and how they're looked at within our society that in part we'll discuss in our course resource center on the days that we are in there. Now, notice it has individual stockholders or the people that actually own the corporation. What are stockholders? Well, before we look at that, we need to probably define for you here at this point what stock is. So here's your working definition for stock. It's a share representing a portion or a percentage of ownership in a corporation. So if you own a portion of it, what does that represent in terms of value? In other words, how is the value of a share of stock determined? And that's something else we need to cover here at this point as well. There are three combined factors that help determine the value of a share of stock. And in explaining this, we're going to get into a little bit of supply and demand and also some verbal math. Here's the first factor. We take the value of the company's assets less its debts and add that into the mix. Secondly, we look at the corporation's perceived market potential over the long haul. That helps drive the demand aspects of determining the value of a share of stock. Thirdly, we take the number of shares that are available to be owned. In financial terms, we call that the shares outstanding. And this drives the supply aspect of determining the value of a company's stock. Let's now take a look at the three characteristics of corporations. First, they represent only 15% of all the businesses within our economy. However, they also represent 90% of all the revenue that's produced. This is where the money is. Corporations are also run by a board of directors who are directly responsible to the stockholders or the investors. Yes, there are chief executive officers or chief operating officers, but they report to the board of directors. The board of directors is responsible for the overall management and operation of the corporation. Now, next we want to take a look at the two types of corporations. The first one is a private corporation, or LLC. LLC stands for Limited Liability Corporation. This is a corporation where stock is selectively sold to a few people, usually to family members or very big investors. Now, if you are looking to buy stock in a corporation or invest your money, please be careful with investing or considering investing in private corporations. And be sure to catch my explanation as to how this process works when we're in the Course Resource Center. And I can point out the pitfalls to avoid if you do want to invest in a private corporation. It's much safer to invest generally in a public corporation, which is a corporation where the stock is offered to the public broadly and sold on the open market in a stock exchange. Sure, there's some risk in doing this as well, but as part of that explanation in the Course Resource Center, I'll explain the difference between investing in private corporations and public corporations and why it's safer for taking the public corporation route. Next, we want to look at the four advantages of corporations. And here's the first. Because the ownership is split among the stockholders, there's the liability for something that goes wrong is spread broadly and doesn't fall on the shoulders of one individual. But more importantly than that is that before, when I said a corporation is set up as a legal entity and as a person, it's the corporation that really carries the liability. If the corporation does some damage, the corporation will wind up being the entity that is sued and responsible for the damages. Now, if they sustain a big loss because of something wrong has been done, it's going to affect the value of the share of stock for the stockholders. So that's another way of looking at the limited liability for the stockholder, is not only is your ownership spread, but also your liability will be maxed out at whatever the value that you paid for the share of stock itself. A second advantage is that you're easily able to transfer ownership in a corporation. We saw that this was a particularly difficult thing to do for a sole proprietor, and somewhat difficult to do also, although we didn't talk about it specifically, I think you can imagine, for partnerships. But in a corporation, particularly a public corporation where the stock is offered to the public and sold on the open market, it's very easy to transfer your ownership. For example, this morning you could be a stockholder in Ford Motor Company, and by this afternoon transfer your ownership in terms of value, in terms of stock, to something like Microsoft or Google. Part of my warning about private corporations and investing in those, it's not as easy to transfer your ownership in a private corporation as it is in public, but it's still not like what the sole proprietor faces in terms of transferring ownership. The third advantage is a corporation has the ability to attract funding in a number of different ways. First, to create the corporation or to grow it. When a corporation is created, it's through the sale of stock. And be sure to catch my illustration and explanation of what we call an IPO, an initial public offering of stock, that I will provide in the Course Resource Center. It's one of the most popular illustrations that I cover, and students find it very interesting. To grow a corporation, it's much easier for a corporation, which is a large business, to obtain loans from a bank. The corporations usually have some pretty good track record in terms of financial stability and so forth. Banks look upon them more favorably in terms of issuing loans to expand their business. Or corporations have an advantage over partnerships and sole proprietorships in that they can actually turn themselves into a bank through the sale of corporate bonds to expand the business. I will also be providing an explanation and illustration of how this works as compared to going to a bank for a loan for a corporation to expand a business, and I'll be doing that in the Course Resource Center as well, and that's also one of the more popular illustrations that we provide. Next, another advantage is for a corporation is this is going to read the exact opposite of the disadvantage for the sole proprietor. A corporation has the ability to recruit and retain employees more so than a sole proprietor. And the reason for this is twofold. Number one, as I mentioned, a sole proprietor may not be able to afford to offer employees benefits. A corporation can. Everything from health benefits, paid vacation, and also the one of the greatest inventions from a financial investment standpoint that's ever been created, the 401k plan. And again, I'll be providing an illustration of how 401k plans work as investment vehicles for employees and corporations in the Course Resource Center, and I will also say that this is also one of the most popular explanations and illustrations that we provide. In addition to the benefits, the corporation can provide employees career opportunities that the sole proprietor cannot. They're bigger organizations that have a lot of different job roles and positions within it, so the ability to advance and promote oneself through good work is far greater working in a corporation than in a sole proprietorship. While corporate structures certainly have advantages, they also have some disadvantages. And the first one I'll talk about is probably the most daunting. Many regulations make corporations expensive and difficult to start, as well as maintain. For example, the articles of incorporation that I had mentioned earlier, the corporate birth certificate, is very detailed and runs thousands of pages and has to be filed with a multitude of government agencies. as far as the corporation being maintained, particularly with public corporations, the reporting requirements also on an annual and quarterly basis, the financial reporting and operational reporting, is quite substantial, requires a lot of detail and a lot of effort. A second disadvantage is that all corporations are usually created originally as sole proprietorships by some entrepreneur that had a great idea for a business or a particular product. And when they move into a corporate structure, quite often they lose control and influence and wind up leaving. And in some cases, they leave with valuable information that winds up or potentially could hurt the corporation over the long haul. The third disadvantage comes in the form of double and triple taxation on income, dividends, and capital gains. Don't miss my explanation of this again in the Course Resource Center as to how this works, so that you have an understanding that both as an investor and a potential employee of a corporation, how the taxation will affect you in various ways. We're now going to look at a special situation with regard to corporations. Corporations are the only business organization that is allowed to offer franchises. And what franchises are a semi-independent business that pays royalties back to the corporation. And royalties are fees to a parent company, meaning the corporation, in return for the exclusive right to sell a certain product or service in a specific area. I had mentioned franchises back when talking about monopolies, because a franchise is effectively a sub-monopoly given by a corporation to some entrepreneur to sell their particular product or service in a defined geographic area, a specific area. And they get the exclusive right. If you're not familiar with the word exclusive, what we're meaning here is not shared with others. In other words, the monopoly aspect of this, chosen sole, their tickets gave them exclusive seating at the concert. And there are 5 advantages to buying a franchise or investing in a franchise from a corporation. And the best way to illustrate these 5 advantages, is to stop and use an example here in doing so, and to think about the situation where if you were an entrepreneur and you wanted to own a restaurant, you really have 2 choices. You can go out on your own and create your own restaurant, or you can buy from, for example, some of the fast food corporations, use McDonald's or Burger King as an example, buy a franchise from them. So let's look at the advantages of franchises and compare that against if you went off on your own. Here's the first one. The corporations have a vested interest in protecting their name and making sure that their franchise and their business in general is successful. So when you buy a franchise, you get an enormous amount of training and support on how to run the business. Obviously, that wouldn't be available. You'd be working on your own knowledge and background if you went off on your own. So the training and support in all aspects is extensive and can be very, very important. A second advantage is standardized product quality. If you talk to any manager of a private restaurant, the entrepreneur, the business owner, you will find from them that they'll tell you, I guarantee it, that they spend an enormous amount of time on the details, operational details of running the restaurant. For example, working with their suppliers to ensure that the product quality of the meats, the breads, or whatever they're buying from the suppliers is matches up to the quality that they want. Well, with the advantage of a franchise is that the corporation takes care of all that for you, and you can focus your efforts as the entrepreneur in terms of promoting your restaurant rather than scrutinizing product quality. The quality of the hamburgers that are provided through Burger King and McDonald's to each one of their franchise operations is of very high quality, standardized, and it really relieves a significant detail burden from the entrepreneur. The third advantage to buying a franchise is you get to reap the benefits of the national advertising that's done by the corporation. If you take the McDonald's logo over here on the right side of the screen, they don't even need to put their name, McDonald's, on the logo. It's just the recognition of the golden arches clearly communicate their brand strength in the marketplace. And you as a franchise owner get to save money and not have to do your own advertising and figure out your own marketing strategy. You really get to take advantage of what's been done and what's been built by the corporation. A fourth advantage is the fact that these corporations provide financial assistance. Let's say by chance you don't have all the money it takes to buy the franchise directly outright. If you're a proven business person and the corporation will do its due diligence on you and check out your background, what they'll do is they'll take your money and loan you the rest at a nice rate of interest, effectively turning the corporation into a bank, provide you the financial assistance to complete the deal for the franchise. So if you're legitimate, they will be able to help you get into the franchise business with them. And the last advantage is that the corporation provides centralized buying power. And this is probably one of the most important advantages. And the way I like to describe this here is think quantity discounts. The power that McDonald's has in terms of based upon driving down costs, based upon, for example, how many potatoes it buys and how much meat it buys, dwarfs the leverage that an individual private restaurant owner could drive deals with their suppliers. The cost of running the franchise in terms of the supplies due to the centralized buying power, the sheer volume, will be an advantage to a franchisee versus a private restaurant owner. So those are the advantages of owning a franchise. Let's move on now to consider other special situations that are possible for all business structures. And the first one that I'd like to talk about is the merger. And a merger occurs when two firms combine together to form a new firm, a new company. And mergers come in two types. The first one I'll talk about is a horizontal merger. That's when two firms in the same market. And an example of a horizontal merger would be a number of years ago, Verizon and Alltel in the cellular business merging together. The reason businesses merge together like this in horizontal mergers, and also the next one I'll talk about here in a moment, is to take advantage of driving costs out of the business by obtaining greater economies of scale. The second type of merger is called a vertical merger. It's when two firms in different stages of producing the same product wind up getting together, again with the same objective. The next special situation we'll consider is that of a conglomerate. A conglomerate is created when firms acquire other companies in related businesses, and usually only corporations do this. I'll give you one very interesting example of a conglomerate, and that is General Electric, GE. Now, you may know GE as a provider of consumer products for the home or the office as well, everything from light bulbs to appliances. Well, they're also one of the world's largest, if not the largest, provider of electrical turbines to energy companies and jet engines. But they're also one of the largest banks in the world. And now you may be scratching your head saying, banks? I didn't know that they were a bank, and how did they get in the banking business? Well, to support their other businesses, everything from consumer appliances to jet engines, many of their customers, big retail store chains as well as airlines, sometimes found it a little bit of a challenge to buy products from GE, have the money to buy products from GE, particularly the airlines with the jet engines, in a given year. And GE has a vested interest in making sure that their production levels stay up. Remember, economies of scale are important. And they get together with their customers and help them make sure that they even out the flow of the products ordered from GE. And they'll go, a long time ago, they went as far as offering them a line of credit. And this grew into a rather large credit business, which is the basis of what banks are based on. And that's how GE actually entered the loan, credit, and banking business. The next special situation with regard to business structures is that of the multinational corporation, or I shouldn't say corporation, because any business can actually wind up being a multinational. This is where companies have an actual operating presence, a physical and working presence in more than one country. And there are two important factors to usually consider when becoming a multinational organization. The first is the possible financial and operating advantages of establishing a multinational business. The possible financial and operating advantages are things like lower cost of labor, being able to maybe manufacture something at a lower cost in another country because the wage rates are lower. Also, sometimes there are tax incentives offered by other countries for a business to locate a portion of its operating divisions or business there. And obviously, working in other countries would also provide new markets for expansion of the business. And some examples of multinational corporations or businesses are, again, GE would be a good example, and in the high-tech business, Intel. The other important factor to consider is that sometimes operating and setting up shop in another country is done so at great risk in the event of political changes. There have been many cases where businesses have gone in to another country, set up shop, and have been operating for a while. A political revolution changes, and the new government comes in and takes over the businesses and nationalizes the businesses under government control, and these businesses have wound up losing all the money that they invested in setting up in that country, and they've lost all their assets. A classic example of that is when the oil industry became what it is today, or started to become what it is today in the early 1900s. British Petroleum heavily invested in the country of Iraq, and as a matter of fact, the oil business became so big in the early 1900s with the advent of the automobile for British Petroleum, that British Petroleum became not only the largest economic dominant factor in the country of Iraq, but also arguably the largest political operating factor in the country of Iraq. Iraq has gone through multiple revolutions. Also, I should probably add in here, the same holds true for BP's presence in Iran, which they wound up having the same experience with. Both countries have gone through multiple revolutions, in which case the governments that have come in have wound up taking over assets of the company. So there's great risk for loss, potential loss for companies operating in unstable environments. Now that we've taken a look at the types of business organizations we find in our economic system, we're going to take a moment and look at how they interrelate to each other to help with the proper functioning of the capitalist ecosystem. And the proper functioning of the ecosystem rests on four sectors that the business organizations are put into. To illustrate this point, we're going to use this simple graph here, which has four quadrants to it. And we're going to start in the upper left-hand corner and talk about, or refresh your memory, that it's through personal investing, angel investing, and venture capital that startups are created, usually in the form of partnerships and sole proprietorships. It's these partnerships and sole proprietorships that make up the majority of the business organizations in our economic system that either turn into or wind up supporting as suppliers, as an example, large-scale corporations that are formed. And the funding from the large-scale corporations, as we looked at, comes from stockholder investments as well as corporate bonds, which is when the corporation goes out to raise additional capital for expansion into other markets. And both the partnerships, sole proprietorships, and the corporations have a relationship with the government, and the government plays a role in this ecosystem as well. And specifically, that role is to structure the right public policies and incentives for growth by all the types of business organizations. Now, the government also has another role, and that role is to work with universities. And they do that in providing grants, but universities also receive money in the form of endowments and gifts from corporations as well as small businesses and individuals. And between all of that investment in universities, the universities play the role of developing key technologies which are then transferred back, yes, in the case of government, like to Defense Department, but also to small businesses and large businesses so that they can progressively upgrade their businesses, make them more efficient and productive, and continue to fuel growth. As we begin to start wrapping up this chapter, we're going to take a look at some other types of business organizations that extend beyond what we've already looked at. And the first one I'd like to talk about is called the cooperative. A cooperative is a business organization that is created for the shared benefit of the members who join it. I know what you're thinking. This sounds very close to the definition of a partnership, but it's different. We're not dividing profits here among the partners of the firm. It's a little different. And let me explain how it generally works. First, the members of the cooperative pool money together collectively to hire managers. And these managers wind up being agents on doing things on behalf of the members. And what they do is they go out and negotiate for the best prices or contract terms to acquire things on behalf of the members. There are three types of cooperatives that are created. The first one is called a consumer cooperative, and this focuses on leveraging the purchasing power of its members to acquire goods. If you're not familiar with the word leveraging, it means to improve one's position by using assets or strengths. For example, in a sentence, he leveraged his good reputation to get the job that he wanted. And arguably the most famous consumer cooperative, at least here in the United States, is Costco Wholesale. The members have pooled their money together. You do this through taking out a membership in Costco, and managers are hired, and the managers go out and they take advantage of the membership, providing the membership's purchasing power to buy goods on their behalf and take advantage of quantity or volume purchasing of the goods to be able to then turn around and provide the members with lower prices on the goods that they're interested in. A second type of cooperative is called a service cooperative. And in this case, the cooperative leverages the purchasing power to provide services as opposed to goods. And this is very commonly found in the banking industry. As a matter of fact, credit unions are service cooperatives. People take their money and to the credit union, as they would do with a bank, and place it in a savings account or other products that they have. And the credit union in turn goes around to other financial institutions and presents their audience or community, if you will, as a potential market for the other financial institution, usually primarily for loans, and they negotiate a good rate on loans and then turn around to their members and be able to offer them supposedly better deals. So service cooperatives are very common in our economic system as well. The third type of cooperative that's set up is called a producer cooperative, and this is very common in the agricultural industry. It's an organization designed to help members sell their goods. Stop and think about it for a second. You have people that own farms, and they're producing on their farms some sort of good, whatever produce, for example, you may have. And it's really the job of the farmer to get the crop planted, cultivated, and harvested. And that takes up an enormous amount of time. The farmer really has no time or very little time, or shouldn't be focused on going out and trying to negotiate big contracts or the best deal possible with food store chains. So what farmers do is they get together, they pool some money collectively, and they hire managers for a producer cooperative to go out and represent them to the food store chains and to negotiate prices for whatever the produce it is that they're producing on the farms. Very, very common in the agricultural business. The next type of business organization I want to mention are nonprofits. Charities such as the Red Cross and Salvation Army. Now you may be asking, why are we including this in as a type of business organization? Well, quite frankly, if you take a look at these organizations, you'll find that they are structured and operate very similarly, almost identical in many cases, to a large business. The next type of organization are professional business organizations. These are organizations that set standards for particular industries or types of work and promotes development of a specific profession. Some examples of professional organizations supporting an industry or a profession are the AMA and the ABA. Well, what do these acronyms stand for? The AMA is the American Medical Association. It's the professional association of medical workers, primarily doctors, that set the standards for conduct and also testing and requirements for the medical profession. And the ABA is the American Bar Association, the association that does the same for lawyers. If you are familiar with the bar exam, which is the exam that lawyers have to take before they're actually permitted to conduct business in a courtroom, that's designed and administered by the American Bar Association. Next, I'd like to mention general business associations. They set standards for business conduct, and probably the most famous or recognized business association is the Better Business Bureau. Now, you may actually have gone around town and gone into a business and actually seen the Better Business Bureau sticker on the front door or window for a business. But let me tell you about the Better Business Bureau. And if you wind up having to get into business on your own and open up your own business, I'd highly recommend that you become a member of the local chapter of the Better Business Bureau. The Better Business Bureau helps both businesses and consumers. And let me talk about it from a business's perspective first. When you join the Better Business Bureau, you are agreeing to conduct your business transaction with your customers based upon the values outlined by the Better Business Bureau. By being able to commit to that and be a member, you can place their logo at the forefront of your business, and that sends a signal to your potential customers that they can expect to be treated in a fair and good way, if you will. Also, many times consumers call the Better Business Bureau when they're looking for a certain type of good or service and look for references. And the Better Business Bureau provides them with a list of references based upon their membership. So this may actually be a part of your marketing plan, and that it can provide leads for you to help you grow and expand your business. Now, on the other side, with helping consumers, if a consumer winds up having a bad experience with a business, the Better Business Bureau will actually act as an agent on behalf of the consumer to investigate a potential complaint. So it's kind of like a two-way street, and there are benefits to both. And the Better Business Bureau does a pretty good job at this and are well known. The next business organization, type of business organization, is a trade association. And the whole purpose of a trade association is to promote a specific type of industry. An example would be of a trade association would be the California Milk Advisory Board, which promotes the dairy industry in California. You may be familiar with their advertising campaign, Got Milk, which was created by the California Milk Advisory Board and used in California first, and then other dairy associations around the United States picked up on that advertising campaign and actually licensed it from the California Milk and Advisory Board. And the last business organization I want to mention is the labor union. And this provides us a great segue into our next chapter, which is chapter 10. It's all about labor. A labor union is an organized group of workers whose aim is improving on behalf of its members working conditions, wages, hours, and benefits, or a combination of all of those. And a great example of a labor union would be the United Auto Workers. So that brings us to an end of chapter 9 here, and we look forward to seeing you in chapter 10, which is all about labor. See you there.